Hi, everyone. Today, we will be talking about yet another one of my unpublished short stories, Family Records, which is about Sam as an older man in 1985 from the perspective of his daughter, Hannah. The artwork behind me is by the awesome Akitku on Instagram, since I never had the time to draw Sam as an older man, which I will rectify hopefully before the end of this year because I do want to draw him as an older guy, since this story will be released in 2021 as part of the anthology that you guys helped to unlock during Inksgiving. So this story is basically a flash forward to 1985 from the point of view of Sam's daughter, Hannah, looking back at her father's last few years.
Indeed, what really caught my attention about this story is the fact that it is set in a very different timeline than the rest of Sam's story. And I found this really interesting and out of the ordinary. Of course, it is not really from his perspective, but this makes it more interesting because we get to see something about his daughter Hannah as well. Of course, we know that in the visual novel, there are several paths that Sam can take according to the reader's wishes or interpretations. So, which of the paths does this particular story follow? Because Sam's story could have different endings.
Mm-hmm.
Which one is this?
This one is the one where he chooses to be a director, actor, and writer, and he ends up with Katya rather than the other love interests. So Hannah's mother in this AU is Katya.
Okay, right. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's really nice to think about how they met and the life they had together. Well, how did that happen? Can you tell
Um,
me without, of course, without going into spoiler territory, but just a bit about the relationship between Sam and Katya?
Yes. So in this AU, how he met her is similar to how he meets her in the visual novel. So after he splashes her with the car and then he takes her back home, they become friends. And then I think after that, he finds out that she works at a sweatshop in the factory. And from there, I think he takes an interest in, the far left labor movements and how they promote social justice for people from disadvantaged families and, people from the lower socioeconomic classes, which Sam technically is a part of, but he's not as disadvantaged as Katya because even though you could say that Sam and his family are working class because their income is pretty low, they do not work inside a factory. So they are kind of safe. They're kind of insulated from that. They're not being exploited by the foremen and all these capitalists who are basically just, and there was child labor during that time too. So it's Katya doesn't even have it the worst. Like she has some coworkers who are like 14 or 13, 12. And I think Sam through Katya gets to learn more about social justice and about society. And from there, he also, I think, maybe talks more to Joel about it, since Joel's special interest is in, labor politics and his father as well.
Yeah, that's true. That's true because Sam sort of distances himself from because he takes the actor path in his career, right? So it is good that he sort of has Katya to to discuss this with. And what about Hannah? How is she? What kind of traits does she inherit from her mother, sorry, from her father? What would you tell us about her personality?
I think she's rather undeveloped so far, but I would say that I know that she is probably into writing, maybe music as well. Like she is artistic like her father, and maybe from her mother, she's not like I think she's a little bit more introverted than Sam is. Like she's definitely not as, you know, outgoing and she doesn't always want to be in the spotlight unlike Sam. So I think
Oh
that she
yeah.
takes off like she's a little bit more like Katya in that respect.
Okay, I see, I see. Yes, because there is a lot of talk about music and culture in general and theater between her and Sam. So it is obvious from the story that they have this in common. What is her relationship with Sam like?
I think growing up, they were very close. And, I think Sam really cultivated an interest in the arts with the children. I think Hannah also has a brother, I think, in the story. So then, they both grow up very similarly, very entrenched in the arts and, kind of growing up in the theater, seeing a lot of movies that their parents made together, and just thinking a lot about the questions that are covered in the films that Sam makes.
Oh, yes, exactly, because he also makes films, not just acts in them. Yeah. This is really interesting for Hannah to grow up with a famous father who's also a director. So does she never think about taking the path of acting?
I don't know. I maybe she does, but maybe she realizes it's not really for her because I think she is a bit more introverted than he is. So she might get stage fright or something and not really enjoy being the spotlight, so to speak. I think she enjoys working with people behind the scenes more than being the main character necessarily.
Yes, yes, exactly. And being able to see firsthand from her father what acting and the movie industry and the theater is all about, she's able to make a very educated choice. Whereas with Sam, it was all new territory because he when he made the choice to follow the acting career, he didn't really know what he was getting into, right?
Exactly. And it's because he didn't know what he was getting into that his parents were trying to guilt him into giving up.
Oh yeah, exactly. They certainly would not have the same problems with Hannah, right? Because at this point they saw that Sam in this alternate path that he is taking, they are convinced that it was the right decision because he gets to be successful, right? And they would certainly not try to impose anything on Hannah in this respect. It's really interesting to imagine Sam as a father and Lev and Raisa as grandparents. How do you think that would work? How would they be in these roles? First, Lev and Raisa. Would
I
they
would
be as strict as grandparents?
I don't think they would be that demanding because I think they have to be more reasonable because they're not the parents, right? So they can't just impose all these things on their grandkids. I think they would be more tolerant, much more lenient, and maybe even a bit like, kind of overindulgent.
It's really difficult to imagine Lev as overindulgent, but I guess it's the age on the one hand and also the things that you said because well you can't really control other people's children even if they are your child's children, right? And also because now they saw that uh, allowing Sam to choose his own path in life was not a bad idea. So of course they would also change as well in terms of guardians we can say of children.
I think they kind of have some guilt over how they were so forceful in the past too, because now that they can see that Sam was successful and he chose what he wanted to do and nothing happened, nothing bad happened, right? So they're like, wow, I think we were a bit too harsh on him before. Like they're too proud to admit that to his face that they might have been too close-minded in the past, but they realize it. So this is why they're nicer to Sam's kids.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Um, how is Sam as a father?
Hmm. It doesn't really go into much detail about that because, Hannah's like 40 or 50 at this time. So she's not really thinking about how it was like growing up because it was a long time ago. But I think that she thinks that he was a really good and supportive father, especially since, he was very progressive, since Lev was already progressive. So Sam's even more progressive than he was. So like she was never discouraged from doing things, just because she was a girl. Unlike a lot of people during that time period, in the 30s and 40s, a lot of people, discouraged their daughters from doing certain things because it was like unladylike or oh, you should just focus on getting married or something. So she really appreciated that. And at the same time, I think she really liked how Sam really encouraged her and her brother to have, you know, if there was a focus on developing personality as well, not just, oh yeah, just get A's in school and like whatever, right? Like there was a really big focus on communication skills because they were actors and writers, and how to communicate with people and how to make friends and stuff, which she really appreciated.
Yeah, that makes sense. The fact that she had a good relationship with her father is very apparent in the story because they have all these, well, not only her memories of Sam as a younger man, but also their discussions because they speak a lot about culture. About different aspects of culture in the story, and we can see that they have a very close relationship. What can you tell us about Old Sam? It's really interesting to see a character that we've seen, well, developing, and at a time in his life when he takes crucial decisions, and he is um, uh, at that age. But and to see him now, so many years later. So how have his the struggles from his youth resolved to this point? And what is he like as an older man?
I think as an older man, he's more mellow, he's not as dramatic, he's more thoughtful, and I think he's more philosophical and maybe a little bit more inwardly focused. Because as I have it right now, Sam in New York, at least most of it is narrated from an older Sam's perspective. As we saw in chapter 1, there's a part where he talks about, oh, in the 1960s or the 1950s, when he's narrating so and this has happened. So he is an older man looking back into the past, at least in chapter 1 and chapter 2. In chapter 3, I think the narration will shift a little bit because Sam, chronologically in chapter 3, is a bit older. He's not going to be like 4 years old anymore, or like 3. He's going to be like maybe 8 or 9. So at that point, I think he's old enough to have his own voice. So the narration of the older Sam is going to fade into the background.
Okay, this is really interesting to see how the different voices of Sam sort of come to blend together, and it does make a lot of sense. Of course, it cannot happen in the present day since he narrates his early childhood, but then as we see him growing up, he will have his own voice. That's really interesting. I like that.
You don't think
Um,
it's confusing or anything, right? Because I kind of thought, oh no, like if there's a sudden change in narration, do you think it might be confusing for the audience?
I don't think so because judging from what I've seen so far, I think that it blends quite seamlessly. I mean, there isn't a big shift, a noticeable shift.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it would definitely make sense that Sam is more inwardly focused because we can interpret it as himself writing his memoirs right from early days, which is Sam in New York. So of course as he reaches a certain age, he starts looking more into his past. So well, what does he miss most from his past at this point when family records is written, so towards the end of his life.
I think what he misses the most is innocence. Kind of like, what is that poem called? That poem where they talk about like the fall of innocence or something? Uh yeah, but it's like about the Garden of Eden, like that sort of scenario. But basically what I wanted to get across was like this idea, paradise
Paradise.
lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paradise Lost. Okay, not as extreme as that, but it's kind of similar because a lot of people, when they look back at their early childhood or at a time of their life where they were not consumed by as much angst or like all of these troubling thoughts, they kind of think about how in the past their thinking process was very different. And I think Sam, like, he hasn't gone through that much crap in his life, in this AU at least. It's okay, right? But then he looks back and he thinks about his early childhood and his teen years, and it was a lot easier. Like, he didn't have to put up with the death of his parents, for example, right? Which was very tragic to him. His parents died in their 90s, so they had a really good run, but it was still sad, to see them go, especially seeing them so weak at the end. So that's something he really misses, taking your parents for granted because now they're gone and he's slowly fading away too. So it's just kind of sad to see, everything that you've kind of taken for granted, your own youth, your own vitality, your parents, your family, even your family has changed because he's dying. His parents are dead. His wife is probably not going to last that much longer once he dies, probably because they're old. And, his daughter is 50. That's pretty old. He remembers when she was a baby, but now she's 50. So, yeah, I think it's just mostly that, this passage of time and the change of culture in the family as well, because as everyone gets older, and Lev and Reiser were the only ones who were born in Russia and immigrated to America, and everyone else was born in America, there's going to be a gradual shift in language and culture and what they think is their own culture. Because Lev and Reiser have their own views of what it means to be Russian Jewish and American after they immigrate to America. But then Sam has his own view, which is shaped by Lev and Rise's, but also shaped by his own experiences growing up in America, which are different. And then Hannah has her own experiences, which are even more different from Lev and Rise's because she's third generation and she is even more distanced from what Lev and Riza went through in Russia.
Exactly. I think that is fascinating that in this short story, especially, we get to see a lot about how their culture changed over time and how the views on uh, their own original culture changed from generation to generation because they are so much more detached right now, right? Someone like Hannah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Because, Sam, he remembers how in his early years he spoke Yiddish as his first language. And then I think as he gets older, he still speaks it, but then there's less opportunities to use it. I mean, he remembers growing up on the Lower East Side as a boy. And then as a teen, he was always speaking Yiddish to not only his parents, but also people at the theater, Harvey, and a whole host of other people, right? But as that generation passes on, Harvey's much older, even older than his parents. Those people who were older, they all are not here anymore. So then everyone in Sam's generation mostly speaks English to each other. And then Hannah's generation, I don't really think they speak Yiddish at all, except to their grandparents, and it's really basic. They can't have all these amazing debates in Yiddish, about literature or philosophy or anything, because they don't have the verbal skills to do it. They can only do really basic stuff like hi grandma, hi granddad, how are you, and stuff like that. So that's a huge, I guess you could say, deterioration from a certain perspective, right? Because Sam, he is pretty good at Yiddish, despite not being as good as Lev and Riza. But then he has seen it in his own family, going from someone like Lev, who had all these intense debates in Yiddish, back in Odessa, and writing books in Yiddish, and printing. His printing press was mostly for Yiddish-speaking people and people who wrote in Yiddish. And now Hannah and her son's generation, they don't really know anything about that culture. Like, I think they just see Yiddish as like, oh, it's a language that, we used to speak in our family and we know a few words here and there, but they can't have a whole, a complex conversation in it. They don't know about the written culture that came with it. And I think Sam really misses it because now everyone takes it for granted that it's gone. But now that it's actually fading away, what will remain of it in the next couple of years? And this is 1985. Like, what happens when it's 2005, 2050?
Yes, exactly, exactly. And of course, Hannah has a very different perspective. She doesn't have all this nostalgia because she didn't really live during those times when the culture was so much alive. So, well, I imagine that Sam educated her as much as he could, but at the same time, she is much more American than the older generations.
Exactly. Especially since Sam, married someone who doesn't speak Yiddish. Katya is
Exactly.
Russian. She's just ethnically Russian, not Jewish Russian. So then she doesn't know Yiddish. I mean, she tried to learn a bit, but it doesn't really work that way. I think a lot of these like inter-ethnic, interlinguistic, or international couples, like they have these lofty goals at the beginning. because I've seen it in real life too. Like, oh, you know, our kid's going to be bilingual or trilingual. Like he or she is going to know all the languages that both of us speak. But in the end, they usually probably only know one or two languages, not all
Yeah,
of them.
that's a really great point. Yes, yes, that's right. I know what you mean. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if they grew up in the States, you know, everything is in English there. So it's very hard to even be bilingual in the States. I mean, in other places it's more possible, but it's very hard for someone to learn, you know, all four languages that their parents speak, for example.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely, yes, indeed. And yeah, I sort of know what you mean. I was thinking right now that I find it sort of relatable because my grandfather was Hungarian, but then he came to southern Romania. He was from Transylvania, and he came to southern Romania and he married a Romanian woman. And then he tried to teach her a lot of Hungarian, and he tried to teach my mother Hungarian, but then my mother was just using Hungarian when she was visiting her grandparents up in Transylvania. So she ended up understanding quite a bit, but she could only speak exactly like you said, like, hi, grandma, bye, grandma, can I have some food, and things like that. So this was the extent of it. And because growing older, he would visit his relatives less and less often. And of course, a lot of his relatives were already dead, and the people, the other Hungarians he knew were already dead, and he was so far away from them, so he rarely visited the city where he used to live. He was always so eager to speak Hungarian with anyone, so if he had the opportunity to speak it with someone, he was really happy because he hadn't spoken in years. And he said that he would sometimes speak it in his mind. I mean, most of the times he would think in Hungarian still after dozens of years, But yeah, so this is interesting because I found what you said actually very relatable. Not exactly to me because I was, well, what, third generation, so it's even worse. I never knew any Hungarian, just some songs, but it's really lost, after so many generations.
Hungarian's a really difficult language.
Oh yeah, and it's really nothing like Romanian, so I never really I never really understood it.
Yeah, I
So
heard that it was like in a completely different language family. It's similar to Finnish, I think.
yeah, sort of similar, but not similar enough for them to have common words. So it's, yeah, it's very different indeed. Yes.
hmm
Yeah, so this is interesting. I really like the way that your story tackles immigration and cultural differences and assimilation, because even in this story, which is short and which introduces a character that we don't really see in any of the other stories, even here we have a different perspective on this whole thing. So I
hmm
really
Yeah.
um okay, so back to Sam as looking back on his life. Uh, does he regret anything? And also, what is he most proud of looking back on his life?
I think he's the most proud of the fact that he managed to make something out of nothing, so to speak, because no one really supported his acting and filmmaking career. People were like, "Yeah, I don't think you'll be able to make it," but then he managed to prove everyone wrong. So he's really proud of that because if he let people's opinions control him, he would have never done that.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And looking back on his teenage years, on when he was in his 20s, where, well, the bulk of Sam in New York takes place, right? He would remember all the anxiety and everything, but now looking back, he thinks that, oh, it wasn't so bad, right? I mean, he's very nostalgic about those moments, whereas in those moments he really thought that he was struggling. But now seeing that everything went so well eventually, and that his choices were right, and that his talent was really there, it wasn't just in his head. So he is of course he is very proud of how he's gone such a long way.
I guess what he regrets, maybe he regrets quitting law school so like quickly. Maybe it kind of felt like he was a bit how do you say that word? Tempestuous?
Yeah,
Like
impulsive.
impulsive. Yeah, impulsive. Yeah, like I think he might have thought it might have been a good idea to stay in law school for a bit longer and then maybe do something related to law for the first couple of years before just quitting entirely, because the first couple of years he came out as an actor and a writer, it was really hard. Not a lot of people wanted to hire him. He was freelance. Sometimes he had to work for free. And it was difficult, especially since he had to live under the same roof as his parents, who were very judgmental and constantly putting him down and saying, you should just go back to law school while you still have the chance. So if he didn't do that, maybe those few years would have been a bit better.
That's true, because he was quite reckless, because he gave up at a moment when he had no idea if he would succeed in his acting career. So at least in law school he had something, whereas with his acting career he hadn't even taken acting or directing lessons, right? So it was just on, well, we can't really see on a whim, but this is definitely how his parents see it. So of course they would be really skeptical, and even he had a lot of moments of doubt. So yeah, he was quite reckless, quite bold. Yeah. So even if it did turn out well, yeah, he can imagine that he could have eased the situation if he had taken a more rational decision, right?
And that
So
would have
first
caused.
you have
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you got.
yeah.
Yeah, I just got cut off.
First have proof that that the law career isn't working, and then his parents would just be okay with him quitting, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I think his recklessness not only gave himself a lot of anxiety, but also the people around him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
hmm
He was with Katya at that point, right?
I don't think so. Not yet. I think he only went with Katya like he knew her, but they weren't really officially a couple until he got more established in the acting career.
Oh, okay, I see, I see. So she wasn't really among those people who were really worried about him because they weren't a family yet.
No, no, no. And I think he would feel really guilty if he was already married to her because he can't really do much for her at that point. He has so many struggles of his own and he's still living with his parents and he wouldn't want her to be subject to living with his parents.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right.
No.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Speaking of which, how are Lev and Raisa as parents-in-law?
That's a very good question. I think they are initially a bit scary.
Yes, I can imagine.
Like even without saying anything, it seems like they're a bit judgmental. But I think after Sam gets settled in his career and he introduces Katya to them, they are a bit more open to her because Sam's already established in his career. And maybe they think she's a good influence on him because I think they can really sense that she makes him happy, which is the most important thing, even though I think they do have a lot of weird expectations, but at this point, since they're already together, they're not going to voice out these expectations.
Oh, yeah, I see. I see. And she is also more tempered. So she's not really the kind of person who would push him into doing more crazy stuff. And this is what Lev and Rice are afraid of, right? So they would really think that she is a good influence on him.
Exactly, yeah. If she was someone who really pushed him into doing something that was even crazier, you can say, I think Levin Riza would be a bit worried.
Would they think Lina is worse from this point of view?
Yes, I think so. And
Yeah,
also
yeah.
because she's like, much wealthier, right? So then they also think, oh yeah, she's just playing with him or something. But because Katya is from the same neighborhood and she's also working class, but she's even more disadvantaged because she's working in a factory. I don't think they have that fear.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, if Sam were in a relationship with Lena and she would push him to follow his dreams, I think they would be really worried because they would think, okay, so on the one hand she is pushing him to quit law school, but then she will not stay with him when she sees that he's failing and he doesn't have money. She will definitely leave him. So she will just push him into doing something reckless and then abandon him. This would
Mhm.
be the greatest fear of Liv and Raisa.
Oh,
So
definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think this is why they're kind of grateful that Katya is from the same social economic neighborhood as they are.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I think Katya is the best choice as a partner from their point of view because, well, the the other choices are also men, which would, well, pose different problems from their perspective. So definitely Lev and Raisa are really happy in this AU because he ended up with Katya.
Not Frankie. Frankie's the worst, I think.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And they would think he's a
Definitely.
pervert too. At least Tom is not. I mean, he's very naive, right? So he would be
Yeah, that's true.
acceptable, but they would think that Frankie is corrupting their son.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that if they were to meet Tom when they were just friends, I think that they would really like him, right? Because oh, he's such a nice kid and he's so studious and intelligent and nice and everything. But they wouldn't really think the same about Frankie, right? Because even without him and Sam having that kind of relationship, that they would still think that he is a bit what tempestuous, right? Because yeah,
And also, they think that he's not that well educated. I mean, it was normal for people to not go to university that back then, but then they want Sam to know people who are, interested in bettering themselves or something like that. But then, you know, Frankie was never really interested in education, and the only reason he finished high school was because Sam helped him, and he helped him to write a few papers in 12th grade. Otherwise, he would have just dropped out. But then Sam's like, "Don't."
oh, I see. Yeah, so definitely if Sam were with Frankie at this point when he quits law school, his parents would like go crazy because this they would say, this is Frankie's influence on you. He is corrupting you on every level imaginable. Because he was never capable to study, he's telling you to quit a perfectly wonderful opportunity. He just wants you to be like him, a deadbeat.
Yeah, because in one of the AUs, this is exactly what happens. Like I was thinking for the Frankie AU where he ends up with him, he quits law school after a huge argument with the dean and his parents, and then he just tempestuously decides to quit, and then he runs away to Frankie's restaurant and he works as a waiter there.
Oh yeah. So if their family have something against him being an actor, which at least has a lot of opportunities, even if quite remote, but well, at least it's possible to be really famous. But then, how famous could you get as a waiter, right?
Yeah, but
How
then
wealthy can you really get?
he was only doing it until his parents cooled down because he didn't want to stay with them for some time because they were screaming at him.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. So that is definitely the worst outcome for Lev and Raisa, opposite to this one, which is the best.
Yeah, exactly.
Will you explore other outcomes from the visual novel in this way with Hannah and with Sam being old? Do you think you will do that?
Yes, I think so. It would be a good idea. As it stands, I haven't really touched the visual novel in almost a year because I've been focusing on the comic instead. But I think they're tied together because ultimately the comic will also explore a lot of the things in the visual novel. As it stands, I think okay, so basically we're going to go through all of the stages in Sam's life leading up to his 20s, and then we're going to just like talk about his law school life, and then from there it's going to branch out. I think it's going to be like volume 5, part A or something, and then that is all the Frankie route. The part A is Frankie, for example, and then part B is like Katya, part C is Lena, part D is Tom. So I was thinking of doing that in the graphic novel as well, because I want more people to be exposed to it. The more I think about it, I think the visual novel, not a lot of people other than, my closest friends and supporters are really going to want to play through it, because it might be like 20 hours long. I mean, there's a lot of writing to do for it. And I don't know if anyone wants to like just, sit in front of the computer or their phone and click just to read dialogue and listen to music for 20 hours at an end. Like maybe like the graphic novel version would be a little bit more accessible. Like, what do you think?
Mm, yeah, I think so. I mean, maybe it's also because for the graphic novel, you have the support of certain websites, and you don't have to do as much. In terms of promotion, maybe, and also in terms of investment from the readers, because they don't have to, as you said, sit in front of their phones for 20 hours. And I mean, so maybe it's a lot easier for the readers as well to access it.
I think
So
so.
yeah, but I really like the idea that with the graphic novel we get to experience everything. That's great.
Yes, like I don't want people who are fans to miss out on it just because they don't like the format of the visual novel.
Exactly, exactly.
Right? Yeah. But like I think the visual novel will be pretty similar, maybe with a couple of surprises, because I want to make it not totally the same as the comic, right? But then there will be music, there will be more artwork, more expressions of the sprites. But ironically, for the visual novel, I think there's less art to be made because it's just a sprite with different expressions. But in the comic, you have to draw them from different perspectives, different poses. So there's actually more drawing for the comic than for the visual novel.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, I see the amount of work that you are already putting into it, and you've only just begun, at least
Mm-hmm.
from what we've seen already posted so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in the future, we're definitely going to see the older version of Sam in both the visual novel and the graphic novel. And, all the different love interests are going to be in the graphic novel as well. I think it will be doing them a disservice if I only chose one of them and I said, "Yeah, that's the one for this version of the AU." Like I want all of them there because I think they're all great characters. I don't just want to, throw a coin and say, "Hey, this is the love interest for Sam in New York, the visual novel." Sorry, not the visual novel, the graphic novel. And you're going to only find out about the other people when you play the visual novel. I don't think that's
Yeah,
fair, right?
yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Because maybe that your choice doesn't coincide with the choice of the readers, right? Maybe they really wanted to explore a different path, and they would be disappointed if you were to choose a different character, right?
exactly. Or do you think it might be better if I did each path separately, like as a separate series? Like, for example, Sam in New York, Frankie as a separate series? No, right?
No, no, no. I don't think so. I think it's much better this way. And I also am usually a fan of uh kind of disjointed plots. So I think it would be really interesting if we were to have different routes in the same novel, and
Mm-hmm.
not so clearly separated. I really like the idea.
But I don't think they should be alternating. It's not like A, Frankie, and then the next week we get an episode from B
Oh
routes,
yeah,
which is
no.
no, that's confusing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, yes.
So it would just
Definitely,
all be Frankie, like until it ends, and then we
yeah.
jump to another one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is how I imagine it as well. Because otherwise it would be really weird. Like would the would you have a chapter with Sam meeting all of them, and then with a different chapter with Sam's first kiss with Frankie, his first kiss with Lena, and all that? I really don't see it
That is
possible.
confusing as hell.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so no, definitely it should be like just like you said, and I really think it would be a great idea. I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Me too. Who do you
Um,
think should be the first love interest? I know this is like way ahead of the time because we're not even at the stage where Sam is a kid yet. He's still a toddler. So there's a lot of writing until we get to that point. But who do you think should be the first love interest in this series?
I think it's Lena. I think
Okay, because we
yeah,
already have the most with her based on the short
exactly.
story. Yeah, and then it will be Katya, I think, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Or I was imagining it could be Tom because he meets Tom early, right? I mean, he from his first year of law school, that is when they meet. So he meets him earlier than he does Katya, right?
He
So maybe
does.
he
Yeah,
could make. I
that's
mean,
true.
of course, he meets Frankie first, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Frankie should be the last one because it is the most tumultuous of the
I
relationship.
agree. I agree. And well, I think people already know about it because they talked about it, but it's not a surprise. Like, I mean, I think a lot of people know they are going to be a couple based on what I've posted on Instagram, but I think they have the most surprises in general.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And I really think that that part of the story is quite of a change of pace, I think, because it's also a bit different in terms of, well, the kind of things that happen.
Oh, definitely. And I think it will probably make for a very exciting ending.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Maybe after all of the like the love arcs we can call them end, maybe I should have a final chapter where Sam is just by himself. Like we don't know who he ended up with because it's like for all of the endings, right? He's like an old man in the hospital and like he's just like reminiscing about his life. And
Oh
he's like, "Oh
yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't have gone through all of these things if it weren't for all of my friends." And then we don't specifically see who he ended up with, but then we see all of the love interests included as some of the friends.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is how I think it would be the best.
So it's up to the viewer to decide who he ended up with, depending on
Oh
their
yeah.
personal preferences, right?
Exactly. Yeah, this is really exciting.
hmm
I love the idea.
Oh, I just realized
What?
something. If oh, sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, because like there was a lag, so that's why I cut
Oh
it.
no, no, you
Yeah.
go ahead because my question is sort of, well, something else. So
Okay. Yeah. Like one more point was that, like, I guess if he ended up with Tom or Frankie, unless they were poly, I guess Hannah wouldn't exist, right?
oh yeah, this is exactly what I was going to say actually.
I'm trying to figure that out. Like, it's weird for her to not exist in some AUs, isn't it?
No, they are adopting her. They are adopting Hannah, who is
She looks
the
completely
same
different.
Hannah.
She just happens to look exactly the same, but she's adopted.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's not like she's identical to Sam or to Katya in any way. I mean, not physically and not of course she'll have a different DNA, but but they don't talk about it, so that's okay. But well, with she's not identical, right? Not in personality, not in physical appearance, so maybe she can just be adopted. And yeah,
Or a nice lady volunteers to be a surrogate for him.
because she's a fan of
Yeah, she's a
Sam.
fan. Hardcore fan.
I'm offering you my baby because I'm such a great fan.
Yeah, she's like, you have to make my baby turn into one of the actors or actresses in your films.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is really funny to think of. And it is exactly what I was having in mind as well. Like, what would happen to Hannah? Because I was imagining a similar story again with Hannah, but with Sam's life going in a different way because he's not with Katya, he's with someone else. And it would be interesting to, and also maybe he has a different job as well because he doesn't get to be a director. And it would be really interesting to have Hannah tell that story, even if this doesn't, of course, end up in the graphic or the visual novel, but just as a short story. I think it would be interesting to explore this idea as well.
Actually, the commission behind me by Akitku, when I told her about it, I was like, it just imagine Sam as if he had not, like he was not able to become a director or an actor. So this picture, the context behind it is that he just ends up being a lawyer and he's not that satisfied with his career. And then he's looking at the picture he's looking at is actually Tomaszewski, who was his favorite Yiddish actor. So he's just like, oh, I kind of missed this opportunity. And he kind of feels bad about not pursuing his passions, but he's like, oh well, I'm old. That's just what happened.
Okay, I see. You're right. Because yeah, now that you mention it, I do remember that this is why he's sad. Right now, when I looked at it, I was just thinking it was the nostalgia and all the things that he misses from his younger years. But yeah, you're right. This was the path where he was a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he would have a lot more regrets, right, as a lawyer.
I think he would. Yeah. And yeah, this is why I chose this picture to be the background this time, because it can be interpreted in a different way, right? In addition to the canonical context behind this, which I told Akitku about, him becoming a lawyer and regretting that choice, it can also be, an illustration for family records where he did become an actor and a director, but he's just reminiscing about his younger years.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Hmm.
And this has been a very interesting conversation, and it's really interesting to explore all these different routes. So, thank you so much for talking about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really great to think more about what will happen in the future for Sammy New York.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Since there are so many different possibilities to explore.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.